and it should say number 4, weighted average. The test is only 15 questions, so you really need every question right. You don't want to miss more than 1 or 2 on this, okay? Because it's worth a lot of points. Okay, so here we have a question about the weighted average of these 2 points. Now, obviously we're dealing with a, what is this called?
Number line.
It's a number line, good. So we have a number line, we have our values, it makes a lot of sense. 0's in the middle, you got your negative numbers on this side, and it's going upward positive on that side. Okay, what numbers on our number line, where do those dots fall? Where do those points fall?
-5 and 2.
Good, negative 5 and 2 are our values.
Do you divide?
What's that?
Do you divide?
Not quite. What do 2 and 8 represent? It's a little confusing because you see a number line and then you also see numbers above the number line. What do 2 and 8 represent? I'll give you a hint. We are looking for the weighted average of -5 and 2, the weighted average. If I were just looking for the average, what would I do with my -5 and +2? If I were just looking for the average, how do you find the average of 2 numbers?
You multiply.
No. Cohen, you know? How do you find the average of 2 numbers?
Did you divide?
No. So if I get a 50 on a test, but then I get 100 on another test, how do I know my average of those 2 grades? What's that?
Percent.
Sure, that it would be a percentage, but how would I find the average of 2 test grades?
Divide
Dividing what?
the 150.
So say that more clearly. You're dividing the one, so you have to divide the 100 in half and the 50 in half, or what do you mean?
You're dividing 2 numbers.
You're getting there. To find just the regular average of 2 numbers, what do we do? Or to find the average of 3 numbers or 5 numbers, what do you do when you're finding just the regular unweighted average?
You got a number that.
Okay, could you tell me what my average would be if I score a 50 on a test and 100 on my test? What is the average of those 2 tests? Could you tell me? What is the average?
75.
Yes. How did you get that?
I don't know. I just.
You just went in the middle?
Yeah.
You went halfway in between 50 and 100, right? Okay, so let's go over how to find a regular average that has no weight to it. Meaning the test that I got a 50 on it and the test that I took that I got 100 on, they have equal weights. Meaning, and that's how you got 75 because you're like, well, they're weighted equally. So you would just go smack in the middle of them. But really, all we're doing is adding up the 2 tests and then dividing by 2.
Oh, you add up.
Right. When you're finding the average of any numbers, 2 numbers, 5 numbers, 10 numbers, you add them up and then divide by how many numbers there are. Weighted average is different. Because in this case with just my regular average, my 50% counted just as much as my 100%. So I just went in between them, okay? So if I were to find just the unweighted regular average of -5 and 2, how would I solve that?
In between.
Yeah, you would go halfway in between, but what did we do to actually solve the 4 to get 75?
You added them.
And then
You divided them
by,
2.
good. In this case, we have 2 numbers, so we would divide by 2. So this isn't the question on the practice test, but I want you to pay attention to this, because I want you to see the difference between unweighted averages and weighted averages. So we have a -5 and a +2. We're not going to worry about what the 2 and the 8 represent right now. That has to do with weighted averages. We're not going to worry about it. Right now I want to find the average of -5 and 2. -5 plus 2 divided by 2. What would that be?
Not even.
Oh, okay, I couldn't see, it looked like you were resting. So can somebody just like move me along here?
Negative
Cohen? What?
-7.
So what's negative 5 plus 2?
3.
-3.
Negative 3, thank you. Negative 3 over 2. What does that equal in terms of like a mixed number or a decimal would be fine? What? What?
Half.
Not a half.
0.5.
Negative 3 over 2.
Negative.
Negative what?
Oh,
You said half, but it's not
1.5.
half. What?
1.5.
1.5, yeah. So it would either be negative 1.5 or negative 1.5. And the reason I wanted to get all the way to a mixed number or a decimal number is because I want to show it on the number line. Again, this is not what the question is asking, but I need you to understand regular average before we understand weighted average. Okay, negative 1.5 would be over here. So I have 0, negative 1. So negative 1.5 would be halfway between negative 1 and negative 2. This is my unweighted average. And just like Veronica was able to do the average of 50 and 100 kind of in her head, she just went halfway between 50 and 100. This point is unweighted. See how it falls smack in the middle? Look, 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, and then a half. It falls smack in the middle. That's what an unweighted average is. But we use weighted averages in a lot of things, like your grades in My Student have weights to them. Your tests weigh more heavily than your quizzes. And thank goodness My Student has a little built-in calculator, so I don't have to do it. But there is a way to actually solve when averages have weights. Think of weights as something pulling it closer. If it has a heavier weight, it's pulling it closer. So your test average and your quiz average, like let's say your test average counts for 35% of your grade and your quiz average counts for 20% of your final average. Which one has a heavier weight? Your tests or your quizzes? Your tests. If they count for a higher percentage, then they are heavier, more heavily weighted, okay? That means your test grade is going to pull your average closer to that direction. So whichever has the heavier weight, you really want that to be your highest grade, right? Because if it's gonna pull it in that direction, you want it to be pulling up, not pulling it down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you're finding the weighted average, you're dealing with numbers that have certain weights to them. The 2 and the 8 represent the weights of respectively the negative 5 and the 2. So the 2 is the weight of the negative 5 and the 8 is the weight of the 2. Which one has a heavier weight?
8.
Yeah, 8 is a heavier weight, so the number 2 has the heavier weight. So negative 5 still plays a role in finding the average, but the weight is only 2. So it's a lighter weight. So just take a guess. Let's take a guess at if this is your unweighted average, halfway in between. Do you think the weighted average is going to fall somewhere in here, the first half, or in here, the second half? Based on what you see the weights are of negative 5 and 2, do you think our weighted average is going to fall somewhere around here or somewhere around here?
The second half.
Second half, why?
Because it's weighted.
Heavier, right? Very good. So you guys are getting this logically, right? We haven't figured out how to do it mathematically yet, but you guys are understanding it logically. Meaning, somewhere between here and here, somewhere is going to be our weighted average because 8 has a heavier weight than 2. Now, we're gonna continue this tomorrow because you guys are going to lunch now, but do you feel like you understand that there is a big difference between an unweighted average and a weighted average? We're gonna get a different number for our weighted average and we can estimate where it's going to be. All right, for now we'll stop and then we'll finish it tomorrow.